Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to talk about modern poetry. I gave you the briefing of the modern era in the previous lecture, like what were the happenings at that time and many other things. This is your lecture number 23 and the class is History of English Literature, ComSat's Virtual Campus, Islamabad. So my dear students, today we'll focus on some of the poets and along with the eminent works. So what you have to do over here is, by keeping in view the previous lecture which we have done in the last class, like what were the trends of the society at that time, how there was a revolution again once more time, a kind of a renaissance in the 20th century once more time, and you can see like a revival of the romantic movement once more. My dear students, basically they all the poets and the novelists, all the writers basically of the modern era, they were very much against the Victorian period, and they call that period full of hypocrites and full of, you know, social sins. Too many sins are there in the society. So basically they rejected the doctrines of you can say that was all about modern literature as a whole and the modern world as a whole. And I told you about two different incidents as well, First World War and the Second World War, and there was one more concept of a stream of consciousness there in the novels. Okay, so as a whole we talked about James Joyce and D.H. Lawrence in the last class, because in order to tell you what was basically happening at that time. So basically that was our point in the last lecture. Okay, so here we are going to talk about English poetry during that era, or that is known as modern poetry. Okay, my dear students, here we are talking about modern poetry in the history of English literature. Basically when we talk about the modern poetry, so T.S. Eliot is the most prominent figure among all the other poets. So you could see here, like this is his description over here, like how he was the prominent figure. So let's have a start. Modern poetry, of which T.S. Eliot is the first representative, has followed entirely a different tradition from the Romantic and Victorian traditions of poetry. Every age has certain ideas about poetry, especially regarding the essentially poetical subjects, the poetical materials and the poetical moods. So here you can see, like when we talk about T.S. Eliot and his poetry, so he came up with an entirely new approach towards writing poetry, and he rejected the doctrines and the philosophies of the Victorian era and of the Romantic era as well. Okay, so my dear students, T.S. Eliot belongs to the modern poetry. So whenever somebody asks you like who is the dominating figure among the modern period poets, so you'll have to tell them like the T.S. Eliot. Okay, why? I'll tell you, and we are going to talk about this poet in detail in today's lecture. Okay, so basically as far as the poetic material or the poetical subjects or the poetical moods are concerned, so he entirely followed a new tradition. So we can say over here like he introduced a new tradition in the history of English literature as far as poetry is concerned. Okay, these preconceptions about poetry during the 19th century were mainly those which were established by great romantic poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, Shelley and Keats. So basically here we are talking about the preconceptions of English poetry, like the concepts which were being followed by the romantic poets, and you could see later on during the Victorian era most of the poets and even the prose writers, they were following the same tradition of romanticism over there in their age. Okay, so here you could see some of the eminent poets from the romantic era. Okay, according to them, the sublime and the pathetic were the two chief nerves of all genuine poetry. So this is basically about inspiration from nature, okay, from natural elements. Okay, so my dear students, here according to their doctrine, like when you get inspired by something, so you write poetry. So the genuine poetry is comprised of your inspiration of nature. Okay, That is why Spenser, Shakespeare and Milton were given a higher place as poets than Dryden and Pope, who were merely men of wit and good sense, and had nothing of the transcendently sublime or pathetic in them. So dear students, why Milton, Spenser and Shakespeare are great poet in the history of English literature, because you could say they were quite realistic in their approach. They were not just imaginative, or their writings are not just based on fantasy or on dreams. Okay, so when we talk about romantic poets, so basically they're impressed by nature, so the imaginative elements which are present in their poetry, those are very much obvious. As far as Spenser, Shakespeare and Milton are concerned, so basically they depicted the society, or you can say by following certain rules, they characterized different characters in a very good way. Okay, so they were quite far away from sublime, from inspiration, from imagination, from fantasy. Okay, so these are the important elements which you have to keep in mind when we will analyze modern poetry. Okay, the great poetical problem in the beginning of the 20th century was therefore to invent technique that would be adequate to the ways of feeling or modes of experience of the modern adult sensitive mind. The importance of T.S. Eliot lies in the fact that, gifted with the mind of rare distinction, he has solved his own problem as a poet. So my dear students, when we talk about the modern man, so as you know that this modern poetry, like this modern era, was started in the 20th century. So you could see like they rejected the doctrines of the 19th century or the 18th century literature as well. So dear students, by keeping in view the man of the modern era, so according to T.S. Eliot and other poets, modern poets, so you could see like they talked about there must be specific way of expressing your feelings, and there must be particular modes of experience of the modern adult sensitive mind as well. So basically we are not in the 19th century or in the past. Now here this is an age of advancement, so definitely we'll have to cope up with the modern trends. So this modern life or 20th century is not at all easy to cope up with. Okay, so definitely in order to go with the traditions or the norms of the society, so you'll have to be civilized. This is a complicated world as well, so you could see like the elements of complexity and you can say indirectness as well in the modern poetry a lot. So as compared to romantic poets, to Victorian poets, or when we talk about the Elizabethan poets, so this modern period poets, they are quite complicated to understand. Why? Because they depicted the society, the trends of the society, or you can say the demands of the society in their poetry a lot. So there would be a lot of illusions, allegories in their poems, and a lot of imagination is also there, plus you can say the influence of the scientific world on the life of human beings as well. So you could see all these elements in the modern poetry a lot. Okay, moreover, being a poet as well as a critic, his poetical theories are reinforced by his own poetry, and thus he has exerted a tremendous influence on modern poetry. So my dear students, as far as T.S. Eliot is concerned, he was not only a poet, he is a critic as well. So he criticized many other works in order to analyze those works, to appreciate and to encourage the efforts of the writers. Plus he criticized the works of the modern era as well in order to highlight you can say both the aspects of any work, negative plus the positive. Okay, it is mainly due to him that all serious modern poets and critics have realized that English poetry must develop along some other line than that running from the Romantics to Tennyson, Swinburne and Rupert Brooke. So dear students, he was the very first one who set the traditions to follow certain new philosophies in order to write poetry. So my dear students, you could see in this slide, like basically they rejected the philosophies of the romantic poets and of the Victorian poets as well. When we see here like the traditions which were running from the romantics to Tennyson, Swinburne and Rupert Brooke. So these are the Victorian poets. So basically the kind of spirit which they transferred, like romantic period poets, this transferred in the Victorian period. So the modern era poets, they were quite against those doctrines and philosophies plus rules and regulations of writing the poetry. They think like in order to explain or in order to depict the society in a good way, it must be complicated to some extent, because modern life is not at all easy to understand and to cope up with the values of the society. So for a normal human being, for an ordinary man, this life is very much difficult. Okay, so basically this was his point of view. My dear students, the point here which I am telling you, like this is a kind of comparison between different eras, like modern poetry and Victorian poetry plus modern poetry and romantic poetry, like how they, the modern poets, they rejected the philosophy of the previous eras over here. Okay, so by keeping in view that thing, this is a kind of revolution as far as the poetry is concerned. Okay, so my dear students, here basically we are focusing on T.S. Eliot, who is the most prominent figure in the modern era. Okay, the 20th century poets who were in revolt against Victorianism and especially against the didactic tendency of poets like Tennyson, Browning, Arnold and even Swinburne and Meredith, felt that the poet's business was to be uniquely himself and to project his personality through the medium of his art. So basically here we are talking about the responsibility of the poet. So as I told you before, this is a kind of a revolution against the Victorian philosophies, Victorian doctrines of writing poetry, and they were quite against the writing styles of different poets from the Victorian era as well. So you could see some of the names here on this slide, like Tennyson, Browning, Arnold, and even they criticized Swinburne and Meredith. Okay, so basically their point is that the poet's business was to be uniquely himself. So here you can say the element of individualism is present over here, plus the poet's personality must be unique from the ordinary human being. So my dear students, as far as the modern era in the history of English literature is concerned, literature was again restricted to a particular kind of society. Okay, and to project his personality to the medium of art. So basically this is the production of writers' own personality through the medium of art. So what basically art here is, that is poetry, and medium of art is by expressing your thoughts, your ideas, your feelings in form of poetry. So basically you'll have to project your personality in that way, and basically the writer is you can say unique in qualities, in different characteristics. Fine. So my dear students, this is basically the philosophy of modern era poets. Okay, so they were quite against the Victorian traditions of writing poetry. Okay, poetry to them was not a medium of philosophy and other extraneous matters, nor was it singing for its own sake. It was a method first of discovering oneself and then a means of projecting this discovery. So dear students, here you can see like a different philosophy that is very much different from the Romantic movement plus the Victorian era poetry. So my dear students, basically here this is you can say according to their point of view, this poetry, this is a kind of expression where you analyze yourself, where you get to know about yourself. So this is your self-discovery. So my dear students, here we can add another point, that is your self-actualization. That is when you discover yourself, so definitely you you express your views, your thoughts and ideas in form of poetry, and then you deliver your message to the common people of the society. Okay, thus the problem before each of them was how to arrive at a completely individual expression of oneself in poetry. Okay, so basically here you can see the individual expression is again very much important. So when we talk about the previous doctrines and the philosophies, my dear students, so the element of individuality was very much present in the Victorian era, and I told you in order to analyze the Victorian prose, so you'll have to keep in mind that aspect, because you won't be able to find out the uniform formulas and the set of rules and regulations in order to find a a clue to analyze the Victorian prose as such. So again you can see the individual expression is very much present here, so we can relate this point directly to the point that was discussed before. This is discovering oneself. So this is not the discovery of anything in the society. That is basically how do you discover yourself, how do you get to know about yourself, and then you express your thoughts, ideas in form of poetry, and then you deliver it to the people of the society. Okay, so this was basically their philosophy about poetry. Okay, so my dear students, basically our focus here is on the modern era poetry. Okay, what is the overall point of view of the modern era poets? Okay, naturally, it could not be solved by using the common or universally accepted language of poetry. On account of the change in the conceptions of the function of poetry, it was essential that a new technique of communicating meaning be discovered. It was the necessity which brought about the movement known as Imagism and symbolism in modern poetry. So my dear students, here you can say there isn't anything common or universally accepted which can be followed in order to express your views, your ideas and thoughts in a good way. So basically here you can see the elements of imagination and symbolism are very much present in the modern poetry. So when we talk about the things any kind of new thing which was being introduced at that time, in the modern era, so these are the two things. Okay, so this is a kind of new technique as well, this is a new technique of communicating meaning to be discovered. So here how can you convey your meaning in an effective way? Okay, sometimes in an indirect way by using different allegories, symbols or indirect kind of language. So basically they discovered imagism and symbolism in their poetry a lot. So previously when we were talking about the Victorian poetry, so you could see at that time the kind of society they used to depict in their writing. So that was a kind of a common tradition at that time. Here our focus is on self-actualization a lot. So basically modern poets they were not in favor of using direct language or direct expressions or a kind of easy language, because modern age is not at all easy to lead. Okay, so my dear students, these are some of the points relevant to the modern era, okay, as far as poetry is concerned. So here you'll have to keep in mind imagism and symbolism. Okay, so we'll talk about symbolism now. Symbolism was first started in France in the 19th century. The business of the symbolist poet is to express his individual sensations and perceptions in language which seems best adapted to convey his essential quality without caring for the conventional meters and sentence structures. So dear students, here once more time you could see poets, they were not forced to follow certain kinds of sentence structure, rhythm and meters in their poetry. They were quite free over here once more. Okay, So basically it is totally up to the poet, the kind of language he is using, the kind of symbols he is using in order to convey meaning. So this symbolism was first started in France in the 19th century. So my dear students, here we are talking about 20th century literature. So basically the movement, this movement was started in 19th century. So you could see like how this movement affected 20th century English literature. Okay. He aims at inducing certain states of mind in the reader rather than communicating logical meaning. Okay, the Imagists, on the other hand, aim at clarity of expression through hard, accurate, and definite images. My dear students, basically this is like we are here talking about symbolism and imagination, their importance in poetry. So you could see like in order to create certain states of mind in the reader's mind. So you could see here this is not only to communicate logical meaning or to deliver logical meaning, like there isn't any logic. So my dear students, as I told you before, like when you like it is totally up to the reader the way he or she interprets the meaning. Okay, so basically this is one of the aims of the modern poetry, like it leaves an impact on the mind of the reader. So it is totally up to the reader the way he or she interprets the meaning or explains the meaning. So my dear students, here you could see, as far as the modern poetry is concerned, it is quite flexible. It's not rigid, like by keeping in view certain rules and regulations you can analyze the work of any author. So you can go in any direction over here. Okay, so the Imagist, here you could see what basically is the task of the Imagist, like they aim at clarity of expression through hard. So basically their basic aim is to clarify their expression by using hard, accurate, and definite images. So my dear students, basically this is like by the description, you can say, of beauty, you can say of love, of society. So they use different hard but accurate and definite images. So my dear students, basically here our focus is on symbolism and imagination. Okay, as far as the modern era is concerned. So these are the two products of the modern era. Okay, they believe that it is not the elaborate similes of Milton or extended metaphors of Shakespeare which can express the soul of poetry. So here basically they are trying to give examples of Milton's poetry and of Shakespeare's poetry as well, like the way Milton uses different similes in his works and the use of metaphors in Shakespeare's plays. So basically this poetry is not just limited to using similes and metaphors in order to express your meaning. Okay, this purpose of poetry can be best served by images which by their rapid impingement of the consciousness set up in the mind fleeting complexes of thought and feeling. So my dear students, instead of using similes or metaphors, you can create certain kinds of images in order to facilitate the reader. Okay, so basically it again depends upon the background knowledge, or you can say the past experiences of the reader as well, the way he or she interprets the meaning. So according to modern poets, you could see here like they are quite in favor of using imagery in their writings as compared to using language, for example similes, metaphors, personification. So here you could see the examples of two poets as well. Okay, in poetry which is capable of capturing such a instantaneous state of mind, there is no scope of Wordsworth emotion recollected in tranquility. Its suggestion plays the paramount part, and there is no room for patient objective descriptions. So dear students, basically when we talk about Wordsworth, he is a poet of nature. He talked about emotions a lot. So here there isn't any scope for Wordsworth emotions that are recollected in tranquility. Okay, so basically So my dear students, here you'll have to come up with the embodied experience, okay? So this is not only like based on something which is imaginative only, or which is truly based on imagination. So my dear students, you could see like there isn't any room for objective descriptions, like there might be a possibility that the writer's experiences would entirely be different from that of the readers. So here, by keeping in view the universal element of literature, so you cannot be objective. So here, my dear students, we could see like they are basically rejecting that element of universality of literature, because it cannot be universal. You cannot implement any particular thing in all the societies. So definitely you will have to keep in mind the individual differences, plus the societal differences, and the condition of the society, plus the religious differences and everything. So here they basically reject the doctrine that was there in the romantic moment, okay? The objectivity was there, plus the love for nature, love for beauty was there, and the expressions of your true emotions were there. So basically they talked about like the two things which are basically similar in romanticism and modern era poetry, like they talked about imagery, okay? So but the thing is that here this is not objective, okay? This is based on your subjective experience, okay, on your subjective judgment about anything. On the other hand, when we talk about Wordsworth, so he talks about nature is present everywhere, so that is not the embodied experience of the reader himself. So my dear students, these two, you can say how these two movements, these are different from each other. So you could see over here, okay, romantic movement, and the one is the modern era in the history of English literature, okay? So my dear students, let me revise some of the things as far as the romantic poetry is concerned. So previously we took a start, like this is the 20th century movement, okay, and the poets and the critics, how they brought revolution as far as writing poetry was concerned. They totally rejected the doctrines of the Victorian era plus the romantic era. So they came up with a new thing over here, and they introduced the concepts of imagination and symbolism in their poetry. So my dear students, as I told you, like T.S. Eliot is the prominent figure as far as the modern poetry is concerned. So he was a poet and a critic. So basically when we talk about his work, so you could see the element of complexity which are very much present over there, because according to them this modern world is not at all easy to understand. It's quite complicated. So definitely like you cannot express your views again in a direct way over here, or in a simplest way. So my dear students, as you could see, like during the Victorian era, people, they were quite towards writing prose and novels. So basically here you can see once more time shift of the literature genre over here, like poetry would be on the top of position once more over here, okay? So my dear students, when we talk about the Victorian era prose and novels, what were basically the reasons of you can say their climax over there during the Victorian era? So you could see like people, they were towards writing novels and prose in a simplest way, because that would be very much easy for the ordinary people of that particular society to understand any literary kind of work, okay? So here you could see in the modern era, the poets and the critics, they totally rejected the doctrines of the Victorian period, and they could see like according to them poetry is basically a reflection of the society, reflection of the world, of the psychological you can say intertwinings of the human beings. So my dear students, when we talk about these things, according to them modern era is very much complicated. This 20th century is very much complicated. So in order to present that century, that era, that is the world of scientific evolutions plus technological advancements, plus there are certain problems which the modern man is facing. So it is not at all easy to express your views without using complex expressions. So my dear students, they basically rejected the doctrines of Milton and Shakespeare, the way they use similes and metaphors. So according to them, it is more appropriate to go for symbolism and imagery, like for example, like illusions and different references of the previous events, different myths are there in the literature. So my dear students, so they were following an entirely a new doctrine as far as the poetry is concerned. So basically, so in order to explain the viewpoint in few words, I'll just tell you, basically this is a revolution against the romantic traditions plus the Victorian traditions in poetry. So the romantic era poets, they came up with a new doctrine, okay. So basically their viewpoint is that you need to be imaginative, you need to use symbolism in your poetry a lot. In this way, like you can create an image in the mind of your reader, so it would be very much creative for him to understand the thing and to interpret the thing in his or her own way. So my dear students, here it would lead us towards complexity or towards understanding of the complex world that is 20th century, okay. So my dear students, now we are going to focus on the eminent personalities of the modern era poetry, okay. First of all, we will talk about T.S. Eliot, okay. First of all, we'll talk about T.S. Eliot, okay. So he was born in 1888 and died in 1965, okay. My dear students, here he is an eminent poet in the history of English literature. So we'll focus on some of his works, okay, and his biography as well, all right. So let me tell you his biography first. Actually, his name is Thomas Stans Eliot, okay, and he was born on September 26, 1888 in Missouri, okay. His childhood, where did he spend his childhood? Okay, his father name is basically Henry Ware Eliot, the president of the hydraulic brake company, okay. His mother, Charlotte Champion Stearns, okay, volunteers at the Humanity Club of St. Louis, and she was a teacher as well. At the time of Eliot's birth, his parents were in their mid-40s and the siblings were already grown. So you can say he was a late child, okay. What about his education? He attended Harvard University, left with the master's and undergraduate degrees, returned to Harvard to receive a doctorate degree in philosophy, okay. So my dear students, here basically he was a graduate from Harvard University. And what is about his childhood, basically his father was a president of a brake company. On the other hand, his mother was a teacher and she also used to work for entirely for Humanity Club, okay. So my dear students, that is all about the biographical element. So my dear students, here you could see, like in the modern era, T.S. Eliot is not facing any kind of problem which we had in the Victorian period when we analyze that work. So basically this would affect the literature of the modern era as well, okay. Biography. He toured the continent after Harvard, okay. 1915, married first wife Viviana Hayward, okay. 1917, began working at Lloyd Bank in London. 1925, left the bank to work at a publishing firm. 1927, converted to Anglicanism, dropped US citizenship, became a British subject. So previously he was an American, fine. So he, in 1927, he's changed his religion and he's dropped his American citizenship as well, and he became a British subject, okay. 1933, separated from Viviana's possible affair with Bertrand Russell. So my dear students, here we are going to talk about, you can say, one more literary figure, that is Russell, okay. Eliot, I came to persuade myself that I was in love with Viviana simply because I wanted to burn my boats and commit myself to stay in England, and she persuaded herself that she would save the poet by keeping him in England. To her, the marriage brought no happiness. To me, it brought the state of mind out of which came the wasteland. So my dear students, again, what is the point of telling you the biographical information of the poets here is that when you analyze their points, for example, The Wasteland, this is a masterpiece by T.S. Eliot, so you will see these biographical elements in his works a lot, okay. Avoiding all but one meeting with her between 1932 and her death in 1947, so basically he tried to avoid her all in all his life. You would see like she was not at all, his wife was not at all happy with staying with him at all. On the other hand, it was a kind of like for T.S. Eliot, his marriage with that lady, that was a great happening of his life. 1933, Vivian was committed to the Northumberland House mantle, okay, remained there till her death. Eliot remained her husband during this time, though he never visited. Okay, so my dear students, basically they got separation, but she was ill in 1938, and she was remained in in a hospital, mental hospital, till her death. Okay, and then Eliot was still her husband, but he did not visit him after that time. Okay, so basically that was all about his life. Okay, in 1948 he won a Nobel Prize. In 1957 married Esme Valerie Fletcher, had been his secretary at the publishing house since 1947. So my dear students, as I told you, like he was there in the publishing house. So basically he got married a lady over there who was a secretary. Okay, 37 years his junior, he was nearly 17, she was 32. Okay, preserved his literary legacy after Eliot's death. So she was a kind of sincere lady, so here you can say like she preserved his literary legacy after his death, and she published his works as well after his death. In 1965 he died of emphysema in London at the age of 77. Okay, so basically he died because of this disease. In 1983 won 2 posthumous Tony Awards for Cats. So this is again one more work by T.S. Eliot. Okay, what were basically the themes? Again I'm telling you, like here we are talking about modern poetry. Okay, so basically what were the themes in Eliot's poem? Eliot's theories about modern poetry are enacted in his work. His writing exemplifies not only modernity but also the modernist mode. So basically that is not about something which is in the minds of the individuals, but also the mode of living a life that was also exemplified in his writings. It seeks to put the reader off balance so as to capture the incoherence and dislocation of the bewildering age. So my dear students, here again you could see like these are the topics of his poetry. Okay, like here there wasn't any balance. Okay, there wasn't any coherence as well during that age. So these were the subjects of his poems. The modern individual is no longer at ease here. So basically this life is not easy for modern individual, because that is full of expectations, full of responsibilities life. Okay, he has witnessed the birth of something new and unprecedented and finds the change to be a hard and bitter agony. He was a witness of the birth of the age of adventure. So basically he said that he himself noticed the change, so that is why he commented on that change a lot in his poetry. He also attempts to counteract in disorderliness, okay, bringing disparate elements into some sort of conceptual unity. The poet's mind is in fact a receptacle of seizing and storing up numberless feelings, phrases, images which remain there until at the particles which can unite to form a new compound are present together. So my dear students, here basically this is the one of the themes of his poetry as well. Okay, so what you have to note down over here is like the disparate elements into some sort of conceptual unity. So basically here he joined all the disparate elements into you can say combined disparate elements into conceptual unity in his works. Okay, aesthetic views. A poem should be an organic thing in itself, a made object. So basically here he is trying to compare a poem with an organic thing in itself, a made object. Okay, this is not something which is only concrete, which is in the air only or in imagination. So basically he is trying to say over here that this is a man-made object. Okay, once it is finished, the poet will no longer have control of it. So my dear students, again another concept, like here these are his aesthetic views on a poem. Like once it is finished, so there won't be any control of it. Okay, so basically when you are writing, everything is in your control, but when you publish it, when you are finished with it, so you do not have any control on your work. Then it should be judged, analyzed by itself without the interference of the poet's personal influence and intentional elements and other elements. So basically it should be judged. Basically he is here trying to say you'll have to, when analyzing a poem, you'll have to separate poet from the poem. So this is his point. Okay, like you cannot analyze the autobiographical, or you do not need to go for the biographical elements of the poetry. It should be analyzed without any interference of the biographical, autobiographical, or the personal aspects of a poet's life. Okay, so you're not supposed to check the intentional elements and other elements from a poem, separate the poet's personality from the poem, and then do the analysis of it. Okay, reflection of life, you could see a true reflection of life in his poetry as well. Modern life is chaotic, futile, and fragmentary. Eliot argues that modern poetry must be difficult to match the intricacy of modern experience. So basically you could see, if you analyze his poetry, so that is very much difficult. So he is of the view that it must be difficult in order to match with the modern experiences. As you could see, like a modern world, that is a world of science and a world of complications as well. In order to cope up with the modern world, is not that much easy. Fine. So what here is, like he is saying that poetry must also be difficult, because human beings are leading very, you can say, difficult lives. Their experiences are quite difficult, so why not poetry? You should make it difficult as well. Poetry should reflect this fragmentary nature of life. The poet must become more and more comprehensive, more elusive, more indirect, in order to force, to dislocate, if necessary, language into his meaning. So my dear students, here you can see, like he is in favor of producing complicated poems full of illusions, full of indirect expressions, and a poet must be comprehensive as well. So dear students, like here you could see, like in order to know about the meaning of the language which is there, instead of giving direct expressions and a very simple language expression, so you need to be indirect, you need to be difficult, complicated, because you'll have to go simultaneously with the life experiences of human being during the modern age as well. Okay, this nature of life should be projected, not analyzed. So it must be projected and it should not be analyzed. So my dear students, here you could see, like he is not in favor of giving simple expressions in language, or to express yourself in a direct language or in a simple language. So basically his point is that, like, you'll have to be comprehensive in order to force. Okay, so this is basically forcement over here. Okay, so this is a reflection of life, what is basically human experience in the modern era. So basically you'll have to go according to the human experiences, according to the human lives, requirements of the human life. So my dear students, here when you analyze his poetry, so you will see that it is complicated. Okay, the poet should draw upon tradition, use the past to serve the present and future. So you'll have to take help from the past in order to serve future and present. Simultaneous order, how the past, present, future interrelate, sometimes at the same time. So basically this is in a proper order. Like first of all, you'll have to talk about learn lesson from the past, and then apply that lesson in present and future. Borrow from authors that are remote in time, that are alien in language, that are diverse in interest as well. So my dear students, here you will see, like his poetry is full of illusions. That is about, like if you talk about symbolism in his language, so that is also very much present here. Okay, so here he is complicated poet. Why? Because he has taken references of those from the writings of those authors who are remote, who are not easily accessible and who used alien language, okay, or who have diverse interests, who did not just talk about nature or the beauty, okay, that's it, like who arose different kinds of interests. So definitely he took allusions from the writings of those authors. Use the past to underscore what is missing from the present. So basically here again taking a lesson from the past and then apply it in present and future. So this is basically what is missing in future. This is what you have learned in the past. So here what is missing, you'll have to fill the gaps by applying the past strategies, past lessons or past experiences, okay. What about his style and technique? Disconnected images, symbols. So basically there isn't any connection among different images and symbols there. So definitely at least for me, T.S. Eliot is very much difficult to analyze, okay. So here you'll see a lot of imagination, lot of images are there, symbolism, illusions are there. So definitely there is no connection as well, okay. Literary allusions and references sometimes very obscure, okay. And then highly expressive meter, rhythm of free verses. So basically he used this free verses rhythm. Metaphysical, whimsical images or whims. So these are basically unusual images as well. So metaphysical you can say doctrine he has taken from John Donne, okay. So basically my dear students, here what you have to notice is that why it's difficult to analyze, because there is no connection between different images and symbols. So his poetry is full of illusions and references. So he used highly expressive meter plus the rhythm of free verses, and he used the metaphysical unusual images as well. But his tone is quite flexible. Sometimes like he is talking to you in another tone, another mood, so sometimes his mood would be entirely changed. So my dear students, by keeping in view his style and technique, so his works would be quite easy for you to analyze, okay. The Wasteland and Prufrock. So my dear students, these are his masterpieces, okay. So The Wasteland, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, okay. So basically this is his a very beautiful work, okay. It is based on love, indecision, powerlessness, impotence and stream of consciousness. Like I told you, like one of the genre in the history of English literature, that is stream of consciousness, and I gave you the briefing when we were dealing with the introduction to the modern era in the history of English literature. So my dear students, The Wasteland, the other one is The Wasteland, written in 1922, and he wrote it after his wedding got failed, okay. Both he and Viviana were suffering from nervous disorders. Okay, dear students, he was in a canvas scene, recovering from breakdown, emotionally distanced himself from the work before it was published in book form. So basically this in Wasteland you could see his marriage breakdown, like the way he got separated from his wife, okay. The importance and sterility of the modern world, cultural fragmentation, okay. This affected sexual relationship in the modern faithless world. The disrupted cycles of death and regeneration, decay and growth, the possibility of spiritual and aesthetic unity through religious beliefs and mythic structure. So my dear students, here you could see like we are focusing on his two major works. One is The Wasteland and the other one is the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and that is basically known as Prufrock, okay. My dear students, here the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, that is basically about love, indecision, powerlessness, impotence, stream of consciousness. So basically these are the themes in his this work, okay. As far as Wasteland is concerned, this is a very long poem, and if you analyze it, it is based on his autobiography as well, like when his marriage got failed in 1922, so he was writing it, okay. So basically these are the themes of The Wasteland. Techniques which are used in order to write poetry are fragments accumulated, okay. Images accumulated, suggestions, illusions, imagery of death and rebirth, you could see over there, contrasts, okay, song, grey, listless, lack of vitality, life, and energy. Land, so basically that is a concept from The Wasteland. Land, despair, more gloomy, bleaker, death can also lead to rebirth. So basically this is not like if you are dead and if you are died, so definitely you are going somewhere where there is no life. So death can also lead to rebirth. So basically this was his point of view. Okay, so if we just you can say compare his songs with the land, so basically these are, you can say, the different phases which are present there in the song and the land. Okay, the wasteland, let me give you an analysis of the wasteland. This attempts at order consolidation, okay, uses myth as a unifying idea. So he talked about historical myths, okay, resist narrative closure and easy resolution. So basically this is about you know, you can say he resisted narrative closure, like he is telling you this poem in form of storytelling technique. Okay, so my dear students, basically this is loosely based on anthropological study of the medieval Gaelic romances as well. So here again you can see the revival of the medieval romances over here in modern literature. Okay?